So I've looked at the early days of television and the development of the TV technology, and specifically videotape and cable. And very much like radio, the technology has really been advanced more quickly than television programming. So again, like radio, the question is what kind of programming is going to appear on television and where does it originate from? So we're going to look at network programming first. Again, the formation of television networks, which is pretty similar to radio networks, and then look at different types of programming. So it's a good idea to review the definition of networks and affiliates. Networks are groups of connected stations that share programming that originates from that organizing network. And then the stations are called affiliates. They are the stations that have a particular connection with a network that is generating programming for individual stations. Of course, the purpose here is, again, to defray the cost of generating programming. Individual stations, it's hard for them to do that because it's very expensive to generate programming, and therefore stations can share the cost of the programming and by connection the programming itself. In the early days of television and networks, there were four networks basically that were the primary networks on television: CBS, NBC, ABC, and the Dumont network. The two strongest networks were CBS and NBC, and primarily they were stronger than the other two because they already had established networks. CBS and NBC had been on radio for years, NBC even having two networks and eventually giving up one of their networks that became the ABC radio network. And so because they had established networks, they had established programs and the talent that went with those programs. So moving over to television was going to be much easier for them because they really had a system already in place. The two weaker networks were ABC and Dumont. ABC was created out of the radio network that NBC had to give up, the second radio network that they had. And so ABC again had an established smaller radio network, so it was a little bit easier for them to move into television because they already had some programming and some talent in place. Dumont, on the other hand, started out of nothing, and even though you may not have heard of Dumont, it was relatively popular in the 1950s. They had some pretty popular programs with some established stars, but they just couldn't keep up with the networks that were ABC, NBC, and CBS. And so Dumont fades from the television scene in 1955. So by really from the 1950s into 1985, there were the big three: CBS, NBC, and ABC. And 95% of the primetime programming came from these three networks. So what was primetime television like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s?
So much of what we think we've lost in America in these last years, the notions of family values are deteriorating, is because we thought America was like we saw it on television. America was never like Father Knows Best. It was never like Leave It to Beaver. But so many people began to think that that's the way America was.
The unconditional surrender of Japan.
In the years after World War II, television emerged as America's dominant entertainment medium.
Those were the Eisenhower years, and America was calm, if not very conservative. And there were shows reflected at that time.
American television, going back to its beginnings, was a very fake world.
I mean, it's just hysterical to me, you know, the problems they would have.
Pick up Ricky's laundry. Now, you're not going to tell me that I don't have any clean shirts.
I'm not.
The advertiser and the network were always concerned about offending the sensibilities of people at home. In those days, the whole family would watch. There were, 3 channels?
Eager not to offend their growing audience, the young TV networks played it safe and hoped to keep the politicians from getting involved with TV content.
The notion was the best way to keep the government's hands out of content is to patrol ourselves.
Broadcasters were members of a voluntary organization, the National Association of Broadcasters, whose function was to prepare a code.
Well, I guess that goes in the beyond repair pile.
In 1951, the first television code from the National Association of Broadcasters went into effect. Networks hired their own censors to monitor their new broadcast standards. Sex topped the list of taboos.
Forget premarital sex. There was no marital sex on television.
A husband and wife could not be in bed unless one of them had their foot on the floor.
Been keeping the home fires burning?
And it's hot weather, silly. Who do you love?
You and Christopher?
One foot on the floor was a step backward from just a few years earlier. From 1947 to 1950, the TV series Mary Kay and Johnny featured a real-life couple sharing their lives and their bed.
We were married, and everybody who watched the program knew that we were married.
When I'm finished with all your socks, I'm going to turn the colors on all your shirts.
As this industry grew and people started paying more attention, they went to single beds for a couple.
He wouldn't allow 2 people in one bed. it's almost really quaint now, isn't it?
Now pour that right on top of this.
But, honey, these are sardines.
But while real-life married couple Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz slept in separate beds on their TV show, Lucy did manage to get pregnant in 1953.
Hey, that looks pretty good. Give me some, will you?
Just saying that Lucy was pregnant on the show required some creative wording.
In those days, you couldn't even say pregnant on television, which sounds silly, so it was a big deal.
Lucy Ricardo, formerly Lucy McKillicuddy, and currently one of show business' most beautiful wives, is infanticipating.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
How about that?
7 years later, a cartoon couple finally brought conjugal reality back to TV in 1960, when Fred and Wilma shared their prehistoric bunk in the Flintstones.
There are things you can get away with animation that you couldn't with real people.
But while sex was still a TV taboo in the early 60s, vices like cigarettes and booze were given free rein on the small screen.
For cooking and for dancing and kissing, you satisfy best. But for filter and taste, Ken satisfies best.
I'll accept that.
I'm going to be a mother.
Louise, no!
Yes.
Larry will make a wonderful father. What did you say when you told him?
I'm afraid to tell him, Samantha.
I frankly don't remember any restrictions on smoking or alcohol.
Are you sick or something?
No, I'm not sick. But I want another martini.
Better take it easy.
I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself.
I was thinking about your weight.
What about my weight?
Well, martinis are fattening.
But as the drinks flowed on television, violence flared around the world. Television news beamed the social and political turmoil of the mid-60s into viewers' living rooms as American troops fought a foreign war and racial tensions exploded at home.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop.
The civil rights marches, the Black Power protests, these were a part of the nightly news broadcast.
TV taboos would change with the times. Just 5 months after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, NBC introduced Julia, starring Diane Carroll.
There were people who were adamant that blacks should not be on television, particularly not in a middle-class setting, living a middle-class life. Hate mail, threats, we all received all of that.
Despite the outrage of some viewers, Julia became a hit, helping to break through decades of racial taboos on television. As racial barriers were slowly crumbling in the late 60s, sexual censorship was also being stripped away.
The pill was available. There was less of a puritanical society in the larger cities. Teenage sex was becoming more prominent.
At first, the sexual revolution in society was slow to arouse television. When I Dream of Jeannie granted NBC's wishes in 1965, network censors made sure Barbara Eden's curvy Jeannie never got too sexy.
I'm a nice girl, Master.
Yes, I know you are, Jeannie. Somehow I don't think you're exactly what my mother has in mind.
They realized that I could be naughty, you know.
Oh, Master!
And we literally had a list of no-nos. And that's when they said bottle must not be in bedroom. Smoke cannot be in bedroom.
Jeannie had the most famous navel never seen on television.
We'd be working, and it'd be in a scene, and they'd say, cut! And we'd say, why? It peeked out.
Don't worry about your Major Nelson, darling. I'm going to take good care of him.
The boob tube wasn't ready for a belly button, but things were about to change.
So primetime TV in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was relatively conservative, at least as far as sex was concerned. But you can see that some other vices like smoking and drinking were just like I said, had free reign, primarily because they were part of the advertising world. Lots of cigarette companies were sponsors for a lot of programs. Also, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, violence was not a concern at all. Programs like Westerns and police shows, violence was fine. Shooting the criminals was fine. And there wasn't a lot of suggestion that violence on television could be detrimental to children who might be watching. So by in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and into the early 80s, the three broadcast networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC, dominated prime time. They were the big three. Anything that was on television was mainly put through those networks. And that changed in 1985. Because Rupert Murdoch, who is really the CEO, the president, the owner of News Corporation. News Corp is one of the 6 largest media companies in the world. Rupert Murdoch had his vision, or had his eyes on the United States as a market. Rupert Murdoch is Australian. He owns newspapers and TV stations and radio stations around the world, and he really wanted to break into the American market. So to do that, one of the first things he did was buy up Fox Studios. He bought Fox Movie Studio, and as we'll see, as we talked about before, he bought TV Guide. In order to do this, as we talked about with respect to radio, he had to become an American citizen, because remember the law that originated in just after World War I is that no foreign entity, either a business or a person, can own more than 25% of a media company. So Murdoch had to become an American citizen in order to own Fox Movie Studio and to buy TV Guide from Annenberg. And then what he did was he went to independent stations, that is, stations who were not affiliated with networks, and he went to stations that sent out UHF signals. Remember, UHF signals go through buildings, so that these most UHF stations are found in cities. And what he did was he negotiated with the independent stations, and he negotiated with UHF stations because UHF stations who may be affiliated with networks are really kind of the low end of network stations. Because they didn't have a lot of power, they didn't reach a lot of people. usually UHF stations could be convinced to break away as an affiliate from one of the major networks. So what he did was negotiated with these independent stations and these UHF stations in major cities to bring them over to become part of Fox network. It started slowly. There weren't that many stations going over to Fox until a very big change came to Fox in the 1990s. And that change was the NFL. What Murdoch did was he worked his way into getting a contract, a TV contract with the NFL. How did that work? The NFL had been around for a long time. NFL had been around through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and into the 60s. The AFL was a new league that was trying to compete with the NFL for players coming out of college. The AFL didn't start until 1960. But what they had going for them is that they had a television contract with an established network, NBC. So starting in the 1960s, the NFL and the AFL are competing with each other. Each has a contract with an established network, so the competition is pretty fierce. So fierce that by 1970, the two leagues come to an agreement that they will merge. There will be two conferences established: the NFC, which was all of the former NFL teams, and they would have a contract with CBS. The AFL, or the AFC, would be the other conference, and that would be primarily all of the former AFL teams. They would have a contract with NBC, and then the league would create this new game, this new experience called Monday Night Football, and that would go to ABC. And Monday Night Football would become extremely popular and a big moneymaker for ABC. But then in 1994, a new television contract was coming up. And what Fox did was jump in and negotiate with the NFC or with the NFL for the opportunity to broadcast NFC games, pushing CBS out. CBS did not sit back and just let this happen. What they did was negotiate with the NFL to broadcast the AFC games, kicking NBC out. And NBC was basically kicked out of NFL football for about 10 years. So now Fox is now becoming established. Not only are they trying to bring in new affiliates, but they have a major contract with a major industry that is bringing them lots of attention. So what were the effects of the NFL contract? It legitimized Fox. Fox was now a network that was not just a fly-by-night network. It wasn't just there on a temporary basis. It was there. It was going to stay. And that, because they were now legitimate, now they had more stations coming their way to become affiliates of Fox. And they were coming this way very often because of the contract they had with the NFL. A lot of stations, a lot of VHF clear channel stations would air very popular football games with very popular teams during the football season. And now they may have lost that opportunity with the changing around of the AFC and the NFC going to different networks. This is exactly what happened to WITI Channel 6 in Milwaukee. Channel 6 had been a CBS affiliate, and during the football season aired Green Bay Packer games on Sunday afternoons. Well, when CBS lost its contract with the NFL to do NFC games and now is doing AFC games, nobody was going to watch WITI on Sunday afternoons because they weren't showing the Packers games. So what Channel 6 did is change its affiliation from CBS to Fox, because airing Green Bay Packer games on a Sunday afternoon during the football season is a very, very big money-making proposition. So they didn't want to lose that. So now CBS has lost an affiliate. Fox has gained an affiliate in the number 30 market in the country and has a clear channel station as well. So getting a contract with the NFL really gave a major boost to Fox television network. So now it took a while, but eventually Fox has become as competitive as the other three. I mean, just the programs that you can see on Fox nowadays, for very often pops Fox into the #1 slot for programming during a television season. So it's Fox has finally established something that a lot of people thought could never happen. That has become the fourth broadcast network. Because NBC and CBS and ABC were so dominant for so many years. Few thought that another network could be established, but indeed it was. There have been some other networks that have been tried. They've kind of started, got some popularity, but have kind of fizzled out. The Paramount Network started in the 1990s as really kind of a secondary network. Paramount Film Studio wanted to try and get into the TV business. Warner Brothers had been a very competitive film studio. It was also part of the Time Warner cable system. And so it really wanted to try and establish its own network. The CW was something that was started by Fox as a secondary kind of network. And nowadays you usually see these on those secondary kind of channels, secondary digital channels that affiliates have, like WKBT in La Crosse has a CW network, has CW network programming on their 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3 secondary digital networks. So the networks are established and they're starting to generate programming for the affiliates. So what kind of programming, particularly within the entertainment side of programming, are they providing? So for the entertainment programming, we're going to look at three of them: comedy variety programming, dramatic programming, and then quiz and game shows. As far as comedy and variety, in the early 50s, a lot of these types of programs were broadcast out to the public live. Again, remember when we talked about technology, there had yet to be developed a good quality recording medium that could record these programs and replay them at a different time. Record them ahead of time, and then play them during the broadcast season. So a lot of these programs were done live in front of live audiences really in theater stages or in very large studios, television studios. One of the most popular was the host was a comedian named Milton Berle. Milton Berle had made some films. He was an established radio star. He was a stand-up comedian. He did a lot of nightclubs. He was really, one of these types of comedians that engaged with the audience and really kind of did some outrageous things. His program was extremely popular. It was on Tuesday nights, so he started to give these nicknames of Mr. Television, Mr. Tuesday Night, and Uncle Milty, which he was known even during his stand-up career.
America's #1 television star, the man who has captured America's heart, Milton Berle.
Lady, please. You got all night to make a fool of yourself. I only got an hour.
Oh, Father, Desmond Davenport wants me to marry him, or he will foreclose the mortgage. Or he will foreclose the mortgage.
Yes.
What shall I do? What shall I do?
Buy glasses.
They wanted me to play a very big soldier part in that picture from here to eternity. In fact, they sent me a letter from the studio, but it started off greetings, and I thought it was from the draft board, so I threw it away. I saw you in that picture. It's a big thing. You died in the middle of the picture.
So what? You died in all your pictures.
I was... Isn't he sweet?
He's nothing but a hound.
You can see Milton Berle was kind of a crazy madcap comedian. His program was so popular that, of course, all the other TV and film and music personalities wanted to be on his show. I saw Frank Sinatra there, saw Elvis Presley. You made it to the Milton Berle show. You got a lot of promotion. You got a lot of publicity about that. Berle was also one of the first to really look at merchandising. He had Milton Berle, Mr. Television T-shirts and bubble gum and all kinds of other things that were out there promoting his program. Another really popular comedian during the 50s on early television was Sid Caesar. Caesar had several shows on different networks. The Admiral Broadway Review, Your Show of Shows, Caesar's Hour. Wherever he went, though, he brought his fellow comedic actors, Carl Reiner, Howard Morris, and Imogene Coca. They were really kind of his ensemble in his comedy programs. But he's also known for having a really kind of a writing room of elite staff comedy writers. Neil Simon is best known for his plays. He wrote several Broadway hits in comedy. One of the better known is The Odd Couple. Larry Gelbart would become a TV producer and writer. He started the TV show MASH. Woody Allen, of course, filmmaker who has won Academy Awards. He's written hundreds of movies and produced and directed most of them. And Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks is probably best known nowadays for his first his film and then his Broadway produced play, The Producers, so these were the people who were in writing the comedy for Caesar's programs. Caesar was so popular that even his own daughter was kind of taken aback one day when she found out who her father actually was. This is Larry Gilbert talking about his daughter's reaction to his fame.
One Sunday he was shaving. He still lived in an apartment in Forest Hills with his wife, Florence, and their daughter Shelley. And Shelley was about 6, and he was shaving in the bathroom, and she came in and she said, "Daddy, what's your name?" He said, "Sidney." And she said, "But do people call you Sid?" He said, yeah, some people call me Sid." She said, "And our last name is Caesar." He said, "That's right." She said, "You're Sid Caesar?" I just love that.
The fun part about the Sid Caesar show was that they did a lot of parodies. They did parodies of movies, and it was really one of the first TV shows to actually make fun of early television. There was one program that was almost as popular as Sid Caesar's program called This Is Your Life. What they would do, it was hosted by a man named Ralph Edwards. What they would do is to take either a very regular person and surprise this person, kind of ambush this person by bringing them into a room or something and start talking to them, that person, and then kind of spring on that person, "This is your life," and then talk about that person's life and bring out people who were important to that person's life. And there were these wonderful, heartwarming, emotional reunions with the person and the family members or whoever. Well, and there's one that has Ralph Edwards going, and but they'd also do personalities. And Ralph Edwards one time did Nat King Cole.
You belong. Hello there, Cookie and Sweetie. My, that's a pretty song, and you have such nice voices. I guess that's only natural because you have inherited a lot from your dad, who's sitting right over here. Hello, Nat King Cole. We've finally been able to catch up with you because tonight, Nat, this is your life.
That tended to be the common reaction of personalities. They were just kind of embarrassed and didn't really expect that. Well, now put that in the hands of Sid Caesar and his comedy ensemble and his writers, and it gets really crazy.
Welcome, America, and hi there, everybody. Once again, we present This Is Your Story. As you know, each week, we give you the intimate inside story of some person's life.
This Is Your Life is a show that held America captivated every week. Whose life was it going to be? How was Ralph Edwards going to find the person in that audience? Was it going to be somebody just like us? Sometimes it was.
It could possibly be your life, sir. Yes, sir. This is your story, Al Duncy.
We did that in the sister theater of the Radio City Music Hall. 5,000 people in the audience. And to do 5,000 people in the show, you gotta get them moving.
Now, come on up here, Al. Yes, sir. Come on up here, Al. The intimate story. He's a little overwhelmed, a little overwrought, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you'll just come this way, Al. Al, see, this is going to be the story of your life. We're going to tell the intimate inside story.
Sid committed to it so deeply. We didn't rehearse that. Sid ran one way. They said, try to catch him. And he ran one way, he ran the other way. He would have kept going out if they didn't catch him.
Uncle Goopy!
Yes, he's certainly overwhelmed in spite of Uncle Goopy once again.
I went way past the rules. You're only supposed to do something 3 times? Bullshit. Try 33 times.
Uncle Goopy, you can sit down now. We'll see you later at the park. Cheers up after all these years. Now, Al, Dusty, if you'll just come back. We've got to go with the program. They're certainly happy to see each other, aren't they? Now, just sit down here, Al, and we'll get on with you all.
So you can see that's a little bit crazier than the original show, This Is Your Life. And this is what they did every week. They would take on, they would satirize a TV show or particularly film. They really enjoyed taking on, making fun of films that were very popular or films that may be foreign language films, and audiences just love this. But television was also moving across the country as a medium. It was becoming, it started, of course, being in highly populated areas, and was, which were the East Coast and the West Coast. But television was, as more and more stations were established in the middle parts of the country, in the Midwest, in the mountain ranges, then more people and really more conservative regions of the country were getting this kind of television as well. And it wasn't as popular with the Midwestern and Western regions. What they were really interested in was more, was quieter, more conservative television. Like that you might find in the Lawrence Welk show. Lawrence Welk was an American-born band leader who had a German accent. He had a German accent because he lived in a German community where he grew up speaking German. But he became a band leader, and his orchestra was very popular. And the Lawrence Welk show was very sedate, very mundane. It had established singers, it had established dancers, and really did little to incite its audience to anything but sit and listen.
Walking in the sunshine, singing sunshine song. Put a smile upon your face as if there's nothing wrong. Think about a good time you had a long time ago. Forget about your worries and your woes. Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine. Walking in the sunshine, walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. La 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 la.
Lovely ladies. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the world's greatest clarinet men, Henry Quester. Henry gives his own special treatment to the all-time favorite on the sunny side of the street. Gentlemen, two. Spring means the opening of the baseball season to millions of American fans. Here's a light-hearted salute to this national pastime.
Well, it's that time of year again. Yeah, baseball.
No, not baseball. Spring.
Ah, spring. Oh, the backyard is busy in a regular tizzy, and the obvious reason is because of the season. Ma Nature's lyrical with her yearly miracle is spring, spring, spring. Every field wears a bonnet with some spring daisies on it. Even birds of a feather show their clothes off together. Sun's getting shinery to spotlight the finery. It's spring, spring, spring.
So you can see there wasn't a lot of controversy or excitement in that kind of programming. It was just the kind of programming that Midwesterners just like to sit back and listen and relax and not really have to think about much of anything. It's still around. The Lawrence Welk Show can be seen on your favorite public television show at 5 o'clock on Saturday evenings. And some of them are the original shows. Others are kind of edited compilations of different shows with the former performers introducing them. That didn't mean that programming was just kind of sitting back and doing nothing. The times in the United States were changing significantly through the 1960s into the 1970s, as that clip from TV Land showed. The Vietnam War was going on. There were civil rights demonstrations, women's liberation demonstrations, and protests of the Vietnam War, and TV was kind of in the middle. Some programs, some performers wanted to just do regular comedy television. Others wanted to kind of push the envelope a little bit and reflect the times that the programs were in. One of those groups was the Smothers Brothers. The Smothers Brothers started really as a comedy duo. They sang folk music. They did comedy with each other, about each other and their family. And the one on the left is Tommy. He was kind of the dunderhead. Dickie on the right was the straight man. So Tommy did most of the joking and got the laughs, whereas Dickie was the one who led into everything and really kind of set up Tommy.
That song happens to be a song written by myself, about myself.
Oh, and that explains it.
That's right. I'm tired. You know what? People laugh at me. That's a song about me, about how people laugh behind my back and ridicule me. It tells of the agony of being ridiculed and laughed at.
Nobody laughs behind your back. You're exaggerating.
You laugh.
I don't. Nobody laughs behind his back.
You and Mom laugh behind.
That's not true.
How do you like it? How would you like someone laughing behind your back? You're certainly a strange, weird guy.
All right, stop it, Tommy, stop it.
Following you around behind your back.
That is awful.
And Mom and you did that. Always
Mom,
laugh.
what do you mean, me and Mom?
You and Mother.
Well, she's your mother, too.
I had no control over that.
That's
because
sad.
My mom liked my brother best, and she never liked me.
Right,
Mom gave my...
This is not true.
Mom gave you... Mom liked you best.
No, all right.
Mom...
All right, just be quiet 1 minute.
Mom liked you best!
You lower your voice.
Mom liked you best.
The Mom Liked You Best theme was something that ran through all of their comedy, whether it was on albums or in their live performances or as you see in their television program. The Smothers Brothers had a couple of different shows on different networks. But in 1967, CBS hired them to do a show that would be opposite of one of the most popular programs on Sunday nights, and that was Bonanza. Bonanza was on NBC at 8 o'clock. And what CBS hoped for was a couple of young people who would be attractive to the audience, the 18 to 35-year-old audience, which is the coveted audience by every network, every radio station, every TV station. This is the audience that is the most influential in consumer products and in consumer buying. But the Smothers Brothers really wanted to reflect the things that were happening in the country. They wanted to do comedy material related to protest the Vietnam War, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and they had some troubles with the CBS censors as they were trying to incorporate this kind of humor.
In the 1960s, rebellion was everywhere, but television hesitated to show it.
In the mid-60s, television reflected very little of alternative voices. There was no satire or criticism of policies or anything like that.
Watching salmon being caught is exciting.
In real life, a new generation was turning everything inside out. Hair came down, skirts went up. And by 1967, Tom and Dick Smothers wanted to hold a mirror up to that changing America.
Our show was timed with the scene of the accident, which was civil rights and Vietnam War.
First integrated marriage takes place in South today.
And do you, Willa Jackson, take Sally Smith to be your lawfully wedded wife until death do you part?
I do.
The rope, please.
They said, well, it's controversial, and we like that, but we also want everybody to agree with you. They didn't want any letters. They didn't understand.
It's controversial and have everybody agree.
When CBS itself didn't agree with Tom and Dick, the Standards and Practices Department unleashed its blue pencils. Thinking this bit about censors, starring guest Elaine May, would hit too close to home, CBS deleted the whole sketch. It has never aired.
Ed?
Yeah?
Oh, Ed, if only we could have been here when the Lord created man.
You're so right.
We could have cut out so many unnecessary parts.
Yeah. I said, oh, this crosses a line. I'm saying, what's the line? It was vague for all of us of what we could talk about.
Good script.
By the third season, the Smothers talked more and more about censorship itself.
Nothing funny in this. Here you are, boys. We're through censoring your show.
But censors usually had the last laugh. When Tom and Dick satirized the 1968 election, CBS took out the sketch and replaced it with, of all things, a 5-minute Nixon for President ad.
Nixon's the one.
The battles between the Smothers and CBS came to a head Easter week of 1969. Tom had invited comedian David Steinberg back just months after he joked about Moses and God.
It caused a furor. Got the most letters ever written to CBS in complaint about anything. Tommy and Dick said, this is great. We struck a chord. Let's do another one. And they told him, if Steinberg does another sermon, you're going to be thrown off the air.
When Steinberg performed a new sermonette about Jonah and the whale, CBS kept its word.
God said to Jonah, go unto the king of Nineveh and tell him that he has sinned. Jonah said, I have a feeling he knows. And Jonah ran away from the face of God. Instead of going to Nineveh, he went to Tarshish. Nineveh was that way, towards Wilshire Boulevard. And he went to Tarshish, which was that way. He got into a ship that was commandeered by 23 Gentiles. A bad move on Jonah's part. And the Gentiles, as their wont from time to time, threw the Jew overboard.
The show is inappropriate sermonette by David Steinberg. It's Easter, and you're fired.
And they threw him off the air.
The irony of all this is that the show was very popular, and so popular that CBS renewed the show for another couple of years in March of 1969. But then after the Steinberg's sermonette and that show, the next day, CBS canceled the show in April. So the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour went from being very popular and a big moneymaker for CBS in March of 1969 to being canceled a month later, simply because CBS was not going to put up with that anymore. They weren't the only ones who were trying to really kind of raise a consciousness of the viewer on television through comedy and variety. Another program, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, debuted on NBC in 1968. It was, again, very popular. It was really kind of a crazy madcap. It was fast-paced, low humor, a lot of puns and play on words, and early there had a lot of sexual innuendo. It lasted longer than the Smothers Brothers because, again, it was a program that had an edge to it. They weren't just doing jokes. They were making fun of established institutions like the military, like advertisers, like the television networks themselves, the government. They just went after pretty much anybody.
Due to circumstances beyond our control, we now present Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
Hello. Suck it to me time.
I love my tinkle.
Wait a minute, I'm not through yet.
All over the world, people are always asking me about Laugh-In, and they all ask the same question. Why?
My church welcomes all denominations, but my favorite is the $5 bill.
I tried to join the sexual revolution, but I flunked the physical.
Very interesting.
See, it says a $1 kiss. I'd like one.
Oh, certainly, sir. No, I don't think I have $1. And now, folks, it's sock it to me time.
Sock it to me, honey.
Well, I've never been bold before.
Sock it to me, sock it to me.
Sock it to me, sock it to me. Sock it to me, sock it to me.
Sock it to yourself.
Sock it to me?
Do you believe in the hereafter?
Of course I do.
Then you know what I'm here after.
At that very moment.
Oh, Uncle Al really needs a lot of medicine.
Well, it's been a few years, John Smith, since they had your head on the chopping block. How you been getting along?
Real fine, Dan. Real fine here at the reservation.
And Pocahontas?
Yes, I do.
Man, who news would be news that news?
Here's Dickie.
Hi, Big Dick here.
Drop your socks and grab your tinkle, 'cause here's the loveliest sport of them all.
Featurette. Oh, good heavens, someone's caught my tinkle.
Does NBC know this show is on the air?
And who gets the wicked weenie tonight?
The General Telephone Company of Southern California.
We all were at that point pointing out that the emperor not only had on no clothes, but was not very generously endowed. And it scared them.
The establishment was scared of Laugh-In for good reason. The show kept biting the hand that fed it.
We had cigarette sponsors. and I would not cut the salute to smoking.
I've been smoking since I was 4. Who says it stunts your growth?
I smoked, and the doctor said I have the lungs of a 12-year-old. It was the first operation of its kind.
Well, certainly I saved a lot of money by rolling my own. How do you think I could afford this swell iron lung?
In this case, Big Tobacco's bigger greed won out over censorship.
And they stayed on the show because they wanted that audience.
And that really is one of the lessons that networks learned with Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, is that you could make fun of one of your sponsors, like cigarettes, like alcohol, but if you were popular, the advertiser was willing to put up with that sort of comedy and really kind of satirical abuse because they were making money. So this is something that we'll find later when we talk about other comedy programs that were in the really looked at issues, but also were very popular. One of the other things that was important with Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In is the influence on popular culture. You heard some of the slogans, some of the lines in there. Artie Johnson as the German in the bushes saying, very interesting, very interesting. The Sakatumi, Fickle Finger of Fate. These were all just slogans, just terms that took off in popular culture. You can see they were made, buttons were made out of them. You had the terms put on things like coffee cups and T-shirts and waste baskets. So it really had an influence on not only what the culture was thinking, but also what they were buying. So that's really kind of the comedy, the kind of the variety show. But comedy has a couple of other types of programs, other genres of programs on television as well. One is the situation comedy. Really, a situation comedy is simply a program that has established characters that get into different situations each week. So you have a main character, or you may have a couple of main characters who are, again, find themselves in a particular situation, and through the course of the program, they find their ways out of that situation and have a particular effect. And of course, all of the things that they go through are funny, or they're funny to not only funny to the main character, but also maybe funny to the other characters. Our Miss Brooks was a comedy about a teacher and the things that she would go through and the interaction she had with her principal. Another program started as the Phil Silvers Show. And the Phil Silvers is the guy in the middle who is a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant in the Army, and of course he goes through all kinds of hijinks with gambling, and his name is Sergeant Bilko, and his commanding officer is there, and so every week it's a new bunch of hijinks that each of the characters need to go through. Sometimes the situation will have a kind of family element to it. One of the programs that's still on the air on a lot of different networks is the Andy Griffith Show. Andy, of course, is the Southern sheriff in North Carolina who has a son and an Aunt Bee who is his family, and then his best friend is his deputy, Barney Fife, who really is the comedic character on the program, always getting into little problems and getting out of them in a hilarious way. And of course, these have been programs here during the more recent times, Cheers was the #1 program for several years from NBC back in the 80s. Friends even spawned hit records from the theme of the program. I'll Be There For You. Big Bang really put the idea that nerds can be not only fun but funny and smart at the same time and get the girl. The difference really kind of here is in the earlier years of situation comedies, the situation might be related to just one of the characters, wherein the more modern programs, there may be several storylines, several themes through one episode that will involve more than one character. The second type of genre comedy is what's known as a domestic comedy. It's similar to the situation comedy, but instead of having one character or 2 or 3 unrelated characters, this is usually within a family situation. Usually, again, the nucleus, the nuclear family, the mother, father, and kids, and then the people who are working around them, neighbors or other relatives. Probably the most famous is I Love Lucy with Lucille Ball and her real-life husband, Desi Arnaz. Lucille Ball was on a lot of different domestic comedies as well as situation comedies through her career. Really, she was on television easily for a good 20 to 30 years. Then even more with the nuclear family, Father Knows Best. Dad was an insurance salesman. Mom stayed home all day and took care of the house while the kids went to school or to a job. Leave It to Beaver, of course, is the other well-known domestic comedy. Beaver is the youngest boy who's always getting into little situations that the whole family has to deal with, and usually are resolved by Dad asking Beaver, okay, what did you learn? And then Beaver would have some sort of hilarious response. In the modern times, the families themselves, the type of families, really tried to reflect more of the varied audiences that were out there. And of course, in the 80s, the most popular program of the domestic comedy genre was The Cosby Show and The Cosby Family. What is so unique about this is that this was an African-American family, and it was an African-American family that was very affluent. He was a pediatrician. The mother was a lawyer, and all of their children were highly educated, going off to college, and of course they were African American, which is really something that, if previous to the 1980s, if you said that the #1 TV comedy show in the country is going to have an African American family, somebody would have locked you up somewhere, because that just wouldn't be accepted by the television audience. But it was, and it was extremely popular for many years. And so television is, and really it's also kind of trying to reflect the possibilities for African Americans, that as an African American, you didn't have to necessarily be in a low income situation. You could become educated, you could have a respected profession, and you could become an affluent person. Even though there were aspects of the more modern domestic comedy programs that were a little bit different, like 2.5 Men, where 2 brothers and one of them has a son who's divorced and has a son. The situations that were portrayed during the episodes were pretty non-controversial. It's usually that the husband, the man of the family, or one of the men of the family, really kind of is a blundering idiot and doing silly things, and a lot of it has to do with squabbles between the married couple, and it's really which was very prevalent in the 1950s as well. If there was conflict, it was usually some sort of situation where the husband and wife were arguing with each other, and one of them usually wound up looking silly. So some of the traits of the early domestic comedies still run through later comedies in the 90s and into the 2000s. On the other hand, there were other programs that were trying to really reflect changes in the family unit in later times, and even in the earlier television times. Julia, that was mentioned in the clip from TV Land of what was in primetime programming, Julia was a real step forward. It was a widowed black mother who had a son, and who was a nurse, and who was just trying to be a good parent and keep her job and do what she needed to do to support her son and be a member of society. Of course, Will and Grace became a very popular program. Two gay men, one of whom lives with his best friend, who is a single female. The thing about Will and Grace, what's interesting too, is one of the main characters is basically a functioning alcoholic and drug addict. So it's it's really kind of pushing some boundaries in an interesting way. And then, of course, Modern Family is really kind of an amalgam of different types of family units. You have the traditional husband, wife, parents with 3 kids, and then you have the older father who has married a younger woman who has a son, and then you have 2 gay men who have adopted an Asian baby for their family. And so it's really Modern Family. I love Modern Family. I think it's hysterical, but it's an effort to really kind of show different types of families and look at them in humorous but also comforting ways. The domestic comedy program that really broke a new path for comedy programs generally, was All in the Family. All in the Family was really based on an English domestic comedy called Till Death Do Us Part. It debuted in 1971 and was not popular. It did not find an audience in its primetime slot. And so it was, after the television season, it was, there was questions about whether or not it was going to be back. But back in the 1970s, they did what were known as reruns. A program that was on during the regular television season from September to about May would often be repeated during the summer and during that following summer. And All in the Family was one of those programs that CBS did put into rerun. And so through the summer, it actually gained a pretty substantial audience, such that when it came back in the fall for its second season, it really took off. Of course, the program is about a middle class, middle income, actually lower middle income, working class family. Gloria is the young daughter who is learning about herself, her new life, her learning about her opportunities as a young woman, just learning new things about herself as she is growing up. She is married to a very liberal college student who is against the Vietnam War. He's against the Nixon administration government. He's for civil rights. He's for women's rights. And so they are living together with Gloria's parents. Her mother is Edith, and Edith is everybody's grandmother. Everybody loves Edith. Edith loves everybody. She never says a bad word about anybody. At times she seems kind of dim, but she's usually the one who has really just a look of common sense to everything. You just kind of sit back and eventually she figures it out. The main character is the father, Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker is blue collar. He's a factory worker. He is, again, on the lower middle income scale of the economic scale. He is a conservative, and he uses language that today we would consider inappropriate when referring to minority groups. And so, of course, when you have a liberal and a conservative living in the same household, they are going to be in conflict with each other constantly. And of course, these are the vehicles through which the program looks into all kinds of controversial issues.
With the debut of All in the Family, Lear took on off-limits issues like birth control, menopause, and racism.
People thought we were making a terrible mistake taking on the whole question of bigotry and prejudice in the way we did. They thought we had no business treating it with humor. But that changed.
Ever anyone used to ask me what kind of a guy I wanted my daughter to marry? I always said, I don't care, as long as she loves him, and he's white.
Bigoted blue-collar Archie Bunker was a one-man taboo wrecking crew.
Yeah, the game's changed a lot since them days.
I mean, a live ball and...
Oh, live ball, the expansion clubs. Then, of course, the biggest change of all, 1947.
1947?
Yeah, that was the year they let Jackie Robinson into the major. Changed the whole complexion of the game.
Believe it or not, there were many, many people out there who thought Archie was 100% right about everything.
You know what makes the Mexicanos such great scrappers in the ring is from growing up 16 in a family. They got to fight over the one bowl of refried beans.
The irony was that even as some of his ideas were hopelessly racist, etc., and should be rejected, nonetheless, his sort of gruff, politically incorrect manner was embraced by a lot of Americans.
When the show went on in January of '71, the network, I forget how many extra telephone operators they put on that night, because they expected to hear from all over the country. And they didn't. But that didn't stop them from being frightened every step of the way about every other show or every other line in every show.
In one controversial episode, Archie's wife Edith is the victim of a rape attempt.
All right. Just stay quiet, okay?
What are you gonna do? You ain't taking off your clothes, are you?
Yeah. Then I'm gonna take yours off.
Wouldn't you like a cup of coffee instead?
There's nothing like humor to burst what seems to be an enormous problem.
Oh, there's something burning in the kitchen.
What is it?
It's in the kitchen.
All right, come on.
Humor reduces it to nothing and wipes it out.
Get rid of it. Get rid of it.
All in the Family's success proved there was an audience for controversy in comedy.
If All in the Family would have broken all these taboos and nobody would have watched, the response would have been, people don't want to have taboos broken in their living rooms. But that's not what happened.
All in the Family was #1 for 5 straight years.
All in the Family had no problem, as pushed on by Norman Lear, to take on the controversial issues of the day: drug addiction, abortion, women's rights, the war in Vietnam. There were episodes where Archie's company, or as Archie's union, was going out on strike, and the difficulty that laborers have when they go on strike to fight for better wages. The women's rights, whether or not religion should be as influential in society as it has been in history. The program had no problem taking on these issues. And much like the Smothers Brothers and Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, because it was so popular for so long, it had no problem getting advertisers who very often were, their products were the subjects of criticism in the show. And so it demonstrated that audiences didn't have a problem with hearing about discussions about controversial issues in society and culture, as long as they were brought to them in intelligent, insightful, and comedic genres. And this would be something that influences television and television programming for decades. Another important part of All in the Family was that it was one of the TV shows that created spin-offs. Spin-offs were new programs that came from characters that appeared in other programs. That is, a character appears in All in the Family. That character is popular with the audience, and so producers decide to create a show around that one singular new popular character, and so they have a spin-off from All in the Family. The first spin-off to come off of All in the Family was the Jeffersons. The Jeffersons were the African-American family that lived next door to the Bunkers, who Archie is sparring with continuously during the last 8 years or so of All in the Family. What was interesting about the Jeffersons is first that George Jefferson, the primary male character, was almost considered as much of a bigot as Archie Bunker was. George Jefferson really didn't like white people all that much. And so he became kind of the foil of new ideas related to race relations. And one of the things that he did not like is the fact that his son, Lionel, was marrying a young woman whose parents were an interracial marriage. Her father was white and her mother was black. And this, of course, just set off George Jefferson, who thought, no, we should stay within the races and not have an interracial kind of marriage. So even in spin-offs, other issues are coming up that in front of the American public. Another spin-off from All in the Family was Maude. Maude was a character who was a cousin of Edith, the mother in All in the Family. And she was an extremely outspoken older woman who also had a daughter who was extremely outspoken. And many of the programs that they had in the Maude series were related to things related to seniors, what kind of rights that they have, abortion. One series of episodes was Maude, who was 50 years or older, became pregnant, and the question for her of course, was, does she go through with a pregnancy, which could be very dangerous to her health, or does she have an abortion? And it really brought to the American audience the difficulty that women have in making these really life-changing decisions, and whom they talk to about these sort of things. Their husbands and children and doctors, and the difficulty that they have in making these sorts of decisions. A spin-off of a spin-off is actually Good Times, which is a story of really, again, lower middle class African Americans in Chicago and the difficulties they have in bad economic times. The father is always working to try and find a steady job. His children in low economic areas trying to stay happy and healthy. The main character, Florida, was the maid to, or periodic cleaning woman for Maud in her series. And she became Florida became a very popular character. And so again, a Norman Lear production. So the Good Times was developed in order to, again, reflect into the American culture some of the difficulties that the nuclear African-American family was having in difficult economic times. Other spin-offs, the very popular Mary Tyler Moore Show, about a young woman moving to Minneapolis to take a television news job. Eventually spun off to, actually 3 programs. Rhoda, which centered around Mary's best friend in the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Lou Grant, who was her boss. He eventually, after the Mary Tyler Moore series ends, Lou Grant shows up as a newspaper editor. And then another program, Phyllis, was Mary's landlord in the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And again, she was a very popular character and was turned into a program of her own. A new genre that really kind of grew out of the popularity of a program and really kind of created itself was the news genre. The Daily Show started as really kind of a nondescript program on Comedy Central that did mostly, kind of made fun of entertainment news, looking at personalities and stars and movies and TV shows and that kind of stuff, until Jon Stewart came along. And Stewart wanted to actually turn it into a news program that analyzed and made fun of news organizations and the stories and the news of the day, to find that irony, that comedic element that's embedded in these news stories and bring that out, or maybe the hypocrisy of those who are involved in those news stories, the newsmakers themselves. And it became an extremely popular program, to the extent that where most young people got their news was from The Daily Show, because The Daily Show was analyzing news stories of the day. It became so popular that one of its reporters, one of its characters, was spun off into another show, The Colbert Report. In this program, Stephen Colbert took the persona of a conservative pundit who would basically be making fun of liberals and liberal news media, at the same time looking kind of silly doing it. It also became extremely popular.
Welcome to The Daily Show! Welcome! My name is Jon Stewart! Hey, we got a nice show for you today.
John Hockenberry is going to be on talking about military blogs. Welcome to the Situation Desk, where it's the same show as normal. But have you seen the Situation Room on CNN? It's Wolf Blitzer's show, but on giant screens. Same. That's all I'm saying. But we're going to talk about the war on terror in a moment. As a prelude, I wanted to play you a rather startling piece of tape I saw on Fox News earlier. Take a look at this.
Well, more than ever, terrorists are using the power of the media to spread their message of hate and violence.
How will Fox News demonstrate this disturbing new trend?
The honourable sons and daughters of Islam will not sit down watching you spread your evil and immorality and infidelity to our land.
So that's how they did it. They showed that terrorists are now using the media to spread hate by showing a guy on television spreading hate. That's, now I can see how I can see how the babbling extremists talking in English might slip through Fox censors. It's not something that would trip the wires. Hey, look at an extremist babbling. But what I have a little more problem with is this.
It appears to be a training video of sorts, too, about how to make a bomb. Should we be showing this at all?
No! No! Not if you're doing a report on what a bad thing it is for terrorists to spread hate on television. Oh, Fox News.
Now, Fox was a frequent target of the comedy, the satire, but the Daily Show had no problem taking on everybody, taking on the liberals, taking on established media, the networks, what was considered the liberal media, and showing really kind of the hypocrisy that they demonstrated in covering news generally. And I think it can be said, I think it can be argued pretty convincingly that it was really the Daily Show that made the conventional news media better, because of the fact that the Daily Show would really show the silliness, the hypocritical, the shortcomings of news, general conventional news, by saying, showing a politician saying one thing today, and then, oh, by the way, he said the complete opposite 6 months ago. It was the Daily Show that was doing that. Conventional news wasn't doing that. And so if conventional news wanted to be considered a good news source, it had to start doing what the Daily Show was doing. So it made news providers better and stronger, because they had to do what the Daily Show was doing in order to keep up with a comedy show. And Jon Stewart, through his entire time at the Daily Show, always said it was not a news show. It was a comedy show, even though several times they broke news stories, including when a presidential candidate announced on their program during their interview that he was going to be running for president. And the response of Stewart, of course, was, this is a comedy show, right? You sure you want to say that here? So the Daily Show really was groundbreaking in that it really forced conventional news to be better. So comedy and variety is one type of entertainment programming, and the next coming PowerPoints will be related to dramatic programs and quiz and game show programs.